blah, blah, blah. I think we're live. Maybe. Yes, we are.
Did you enable live transcript?
Yes. I think I remembered everything this time. I hope. Probably not. Let's see.
Because I don't see them. That's why I'm asking. No. On YouTube it's visible. I just don't see it in Zoom. I don't know why.
Okay. Do you have to enable them individually?
Where? On Zoom?
Yeah.
No, I should see them. I don't know why I don't see them. I usually see them.
I can try and disable and enable them again.
No, you're not able. You have to do it. It's only possible before you start live stream.
No, it is enabled. I can see the live transcript.
In YouTube, they're visible, yeah.
No, even in Zoom, they're visible. I can see.
Okay, so it's just my.
Perfect.
You should have a button at the bottom, live transcript.
Now I clicked on show subtitles. Okay, smart.
Nice. So it wasn't my fault. Yes.
Thanks, Ovik.
Perfect. All right. Welcome everyone to another Spec 3.0 meeting. We have. We have. All right. Blackout. Does anyone want to introduce themselves before we get into it? No. All right. It's okay. You don't have to. So this time we have 2 items on the agenda. But before jumping into it, is there anyone who wants to discuss anything not on the agenda? Or want to bring something up? Okay, let's jump into it then. Suvik, I did add your item to the agenda as the first topic. Do you want to start off or?
Yeah, sure. So can I share my screen? No.
Yes, you can.
I think you can share it like that.
Perfect.
So. Where is the chat? So basically what I'm going to discuss is a specific use case that we have for Glee, and we are pushing to add some new features in the bindings for WebSocket. So that's what I'm going to talk about, like why do we need it, and that's it. So this is the PR that we started talking about. I did send the PR link of the PR in the chat, so you can see it. Okay, so we are just trying to add. So we are just trying to add 2 parameters, header values and query values in the WebSocket bindings. So which will let us pass the actual headers and query in the spec. Right. So this is something we need in Glee. And so what is Glee, if you ask? So Glee is a framework which basically makes it easier to build server-side applications, and it uses async API specifications, and you write your own business logic as a function and you connect it. But that's all you need to do, and it basically spins up server and handles all the requests to the right channels and all. So you just need to do very little, and you can use, and everything is connected. Like documentation gets generated from your spec, and everything ties in one place. Okay, so thing is, why do we need parameters and WebSocket bindings, right? So this is a PR that I'm working on right now. So basically what it will do once it gets merged is allow Glee not only act as a server, but also as a client. Okay, so what that means is Glee will be able to receive connections to the server, and will also be able to connect to other WebSocket servers. So when we need to connect to other WebSocket servers, we do need to pass in headers and different other authentications tokens to actually make the connection happen. And so for that, Glee, so like to achieve that, we are trying to add the two different header parameters so that we can send in header and query values through bindings. And so this is how you define what the headers looks like, and we actually have to pass in the headers so that the server can actually accept the headers. And like there are a couple of ways you could do it, and this kind of going with this spec, because that makes most of sense, because most of the things are already in the spec. So I could just write these are the headers we're going to pass or we're sending, and it stays at the same place. Other than that, we could use a separate config file that we were using, but it is basically the same structure that our specification is. So it's like you're writing same thing twice. It's gonna make weird. Like you have to repeat yourself, right? So that's one problem with it. So that's why I tried to go with that. Other than that, we can use extension to pass in values, but I guess it doesn't bindings doesn't support you extensions currently. So that is something. And like, okay, so this is the main thing. And if you read the initial PR, you see Fran has given some ideas, one of which is something I like, and I can share you the link as well. Where we could have a separate feature of spec for variables and stuff, and like it's a separate component. It has all the variables, and we reference them into different servers or channels, and use them to pass in configurations, secret configurations. Any questions?
Yeah. So I have. Can you scroll a bit up? The section send header and query key values from client side. So you have on the left hand side no, I'm just telling others what I'm looking at. Okay. That's actually what you have in the middle of the screen. So on the left you have the current headers binding for WebSocket.
Yeah.
Right. And on the right hand side you have
what do you want to add?
Sorry?
What we want to add to the bindings.
Yeah, exactly. So something that is not yet there, and you want to solve your problem by adding this specific WebSocket binding only. Right? That's the And now can you explain, because I'm not Glee user at all yet, maybe one day, but basically what do you mean by this using a separate config file? What is this config file? What is it?
So it's like if you in Next.js you have this config file like next.config.js. So we have a same configuration file for us, where we basically specify we pass in already built servers and all. So there we could pass the authentication headers like this. It's like just consider it as the next, how Next does it, like the same as that. It's a config file for our application to add some extra parameters.
Is it something you write, or is it because I know that concept of Glee is that some of the code it's like in sync with async API file. It's generated out of async API file, but like in case of this
we write the Glee config file. Like if you want to change,
I didn't get it. So this one is generated. We
write this config file.
Okay, you write it manually. Okay. Yeah. Now, if you write it Okay, you write it manually, and now the problem is that you write it manually and you have to manually specify the headers. That's the
Yeah.
core of the problem.
Yeah.
And
So
you'd like
if you
to
look into this, it's like I'm writing the same thing that is already written in my spec, right? Like the server, the channel, and then we are specifying the bindings. So it follows the same pattern as our spec. So why not have it in spec? Like you're writing the spec 2 times. It's like, okay. It's like,
Can I ask a question?
yeah, sure.
Have you tried using the parameters and message headers that are natively in the spec at the moment?
What do you mean by like?
So
I mean, you were telling I'll be adding headers inside messages. So it's like message. Actually didn't try that because
but
we
parameters
kind of
are
wanted,
only for channels, right? So
yeah.
parameters are for channels, but with the message, you can define headers for the message itself. And you can also define in parameters, you can also define, if I remember correctly, the location of the parameter, which can be part of the header itself. But I don't think it's been used that much. So I'm not sure if we actually have an example where it's being used. But I'm pretty sure that it is possible. Just don't know to which extent. That's why I'm asking whether the native keywords as part of the spec currently, whether they are enough to do this or not.
But
Even the parameter object says that you have to, it has to be schema or reference object.
And it's
Yes.
for channel anyway, only. Just to clarify, like it's not for header, right?
Yeah, no. It's fine.
But isn't that
It's
why
channel.
Isn't that why we have the message headers? That is part of the message object.
Let me check.
If you look at it's here. We have headers keyword where you can define what the headers are.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they must not be protocol headers, which I don't know what. I'm assuming it's something about the native. Sure, go.
In even the headers that we have in message object, it says that it is a schema object. Like you define the schema and then the value is like checked according to a schema, but we want to pass the value itself. We want a parameter that could take in the value itself.
Wait, just to clarify, I think like so because like Jonas, you're pointing to message headers, right? And as far as I know, Suvik is working on binding for WebSocket, but not on a message head level, but on the channel binding level. Because because like in case of WebSocket, Jonas, you don't have headers basically in messages. So that's why you need to specify special headers on a channel level through the binding, because that's how the authentication works basically in WebSocket. That like headers is only used to really authenticate on when you connect to the server. And parameters are only for channel names, so they are not be helpful here. But I would ask, like, if, because like in WebSockets we know that there's this special case, there are no channels basically. Usually you just connect to a specific I don't even know how to say it, like path, endpoint, whatever. So why can't we specify, because like what you need, like what you show in your example is, for example, that the header is bearer, and there's this and there's this placeholder, the environment variable token, right?
So the environment variable token is something, it's like you can hard code the value, but I was thinking maybe if we even do this, we can extract it and then try to access our environment variable and figure out what token corresponds to. If like it matches, so it's something Glee does, not something in Spec, not something binding Spec.
But isn't bearer, shouldn't this information be on the server level? And like when you specify, because like the async API Spec is now designed in the way that you specify authorization details on a server level, right? So you basically explain how to connect to the server, and you have this special security scheme object, and you can specify that like just looking now in the spec, you can specify, for example, that the format for authentication is bearer format. So you can already have this specified on the server level that it's bearer. So you, in your code, you can interpret such async API document. At least I think I understand your use case, but if you would have on the server's level on WebSockets, not only URL and protocol, but you would also have this information about authentication specified, and that the bearer is the format. Isn't it enough for you that you can then in Glee you can interpret it as, okay, so it's a WebSocket, but it's secured with this particular security format. So I know that in case of WebSocket, it's basically a header that I have to pass with authentication property bearer plus the token, and then it's up to the Glee to define what's the environment variable for the token, right?
But when Glee will act as a client, it will connect to other WebSocket servers. That is not like other people have different kinds of authentication, right? Like some people, I've seen some WebSockets that you use only query values, like you do question mark and you send a code and they validate you through that, right? Like, so it has to account for all other use cases. Or if someone is using a different kind of authentication, you can have, like, you should be able to have that thing also, right?
Okay, so what you're saying is that even in case of bearer format, somebody is allowing to push it through the query parameters when connecting to the channel.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Like, see, since WebSocket doesn't have channels, I have seen like people can use query values to specify channels, right? Like there's a URL and there's query values, basically tells you which channel or which thing you are going to listen to or like send something. So you need to send query values specific to the channel, I mean the connection.
Do you mind if I show something? Just real quick.
Yeah, sure. Say stop sharing.
I think I can override it actually. But yeah. So what I'm talking about is that we have, so I know that generally parameters are part of the path of the channel. The problem is, or the thing is that we have this location runtime thing that can define different places for that parameter. And I'm unsure whether this is actually valid, but I think it is. I just haven't used it before, so take it with a grain of salt. But if you define the parameters like this, isn't that the same as what you're trying to achieve with bindings? Which is just, in this case, it's natively within the spec itself.
I mean, even like in the documentation of parameter, it says that it should be a schema object, but we kind of need, like, we need it to say it could be a schema object, but also a string or an object of values. Like it has to, it's not a schema, it's a value.
And what is the value that you want it to be?
So it's like, suppose you're connecting to a server and you want to pass in the header. So you pass in the actual header value in that parameter.
But wouldn't that be the same as doing this? I can't remember what it is.
like you can do that, but it says it should be a like does const.
It's true that you can't define here exactly that that this, for example, is a parameter that you provide. That's not possible with this schema. But it is possible to, for example, do is it match? No, format? No, I can't remember. Regex? Something. So you can, for example, say, well, we must match this and then some other value. But that's, of course, not until you actually perform the action where it's realized what that value is, or that token. But as you also touched, it's a bit I'm not sure whether you actually want to do it with parameters and headers instead of the security schema object, which also has this token, as I recall, has this token possibility. I think it's the API key, right? I would assume that would be possible as well.
I could also send in this.
Because within the security, you can define exactly that it's part of the headers, for example, or query. So I'm just challenging whether we really need a binding for it or whether we already support it. That's the only thing I'm.
Actually, I think that your example, Jonas, we probably are missing some validation on the parser. It should actually fail. So the thing is
it is failing. So I don't know.
No. It should fail. Like it should highlight that the authentication parameter is not really present in the channel name. Like, because the spec is pretty clear here. Like, parameter object describes a parameter included in the channel name.
It's like
that's true.
/ authentication. It has to be. So I sent another PR. So this PR kind of has the same. It's trying to do the same thing that I'm trying to do, but a bit different approach. So they're not trying to add a new parameter, but changing the existing parameter so that it can support both scalar values and also schema.
I haven't seen this one before.
But how this one relates, you mean?
So they are also trying to pass in scalar values. I mean, okay, so how do I? So the scalar parameter values, and I'm also trying to do the same thing. But what I'm doing is I'm creating a new object called header values or query values. But they are passing in the same scalar value with the same existing parameter. But so they are just changing that since the parameters they want to change is so they want to update the old one. Wait, channel. Okay, so they are. So they are adding key value. So in Kafka, key should be a schema. So they are changing it. It could be a schema or a string value. Like it could be a schema or a string value. So you can define the schema or you can pass in a string value as a key property. Or like, can I share my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so like this. So here you can see the property key. It could be either a constant value, which of type string, or could be a schema. one of these two.
I don't think I understand the correlation.
Okay, so yeah,
And
open.
it's message. I guess you want to.
So like so if you see WebSockets right now. Okay, so here's it says query and header should be schema objects, right? Because you define how the header should look. So what he's trying to do is adding schema. Query could be a schema object and a string. So we pass in schema or we pass in the value in this query field.
Okay, gotcha.
I'm also trying to do the same thing, but I'm introducing a new parameter. So it's like, should we introduce a new
Right.
parameter or?
Oh, that's what they're doing.
I actually haven't seen the HTTP bindings, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty fresh pull request, I think.
Yeah, last week.
Yeah. Okay. But there was some Slack discussion, I see. Hey, wait, but it's Kafka related. It's not MQTT. It's not WebSocket, I mean. Okay.
Interesting.
Okay.
Is it really not possible to define queries and headers in the spec?
Like we can define query and headers, but we want to pass the value, the actual value. So, like, I mean,
But you
know.
Sorry, go.
So we don't pass values, right? Schema object means you define how query should look, like how the query object should look. That's what schema object means. And you also, but in Glee as a client, it has to send the query object. So it needs a parameter where it could say, okay, this is the query object. Like this is the query object, and this is the schema object.
Yes, but the schema object only defines the structure for it.
Yeah, and we got to send the real values.
But generally, you don't want to have the actual values within the spec, do you?
Yeah, generally you wouldn't. So I guess we could use extensions, because like Glee is using everything as Glee is using Spec to run everything. So it kind of needs, it's like, as a user, I am writing the spec so that Glee could interpret it and do certain things.
Also, you're looking for almost like like you can define examples for the headers themselves. Yeah. Is that what you're trying to do?
Not the actual headers, like not example. We pass the actual values.
But you can do it with schema object, right? Like with headers schema object, you can specify that it's the property is called authentication, and then you can specify with I guess I think the regex is totally okay in schema objects, so you can specify it with regex how actually the value should look like. You should be able to do it. Like,
yeah, so to add the value, it's like kind of like a hack. So when someone else is using, you'll be like, you have to write regex for this, and people will be like, yeah, I just want to pass the values. Like it's like we know, we understand it, but most people like trying to create it as easy as possible for users. So
okay, but so regex is kind of not nice, I guess. What you I think I know what you're saying, but there are also other options, like I don't remember them, but I think you can even say that there's just one possible value. Don't remember it's constant or default. I don't remember the keyword. Huh?
Enums.
No, enum, but enum is usually for list, right? I mean,
Yes.
usually, but there's also this keyword in JSON schema when you can explicitly specify what's the, and that there's
Const.
just const, yeah. So you can, with JSON schema, you can say, okay, the const is for authentication, it's bearer and dollar token. Although I'm still not sold by the idea of dollar token, but yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, like I would say not to look in the dollar token, because that is something I was thinking as an extra feature in Spec.
Okay, so basically dollar
in
token
JSON.
is not the scope of this for now, right?
Yeah. Just to be able to pass the thing. And
Okay. So all of this discussion is just to add a specific value for a specific header.
Yeah.
Or query, or
Yeah.
Now I get it. Yeah. I'm on board with what Lucas is saying, that it to me, it makes sense that you add it alongside the query and the headers, where you define the structure there. You also define what exactly the values can be if you want them to have specific values.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that even though that you said it was out of scope, was the idea to have some type of templating language for those values so it can be changed at runtime, or?
So that's something Fran kind of was talking about in the comment. So he was telling maybe this could be a feature in the spec where we actually define variables as a component and we can use it. And there we basically say you can have this dollar something, and we'll parse it through and try to figure out if environment variable has that token, and we'll fetch it and kind of create the string.
Right.
And maybe other parts of the spec can also use it.
If we want to do that later, we would have to go around JSON schema, I think. Like you can't have it part of the schema object, because then you change the, because the spec has to allow it, right? You have to define somewhere that this is a standard that we are following for this specific, like this value can be a templating language of some sort where you can replace them at runtime or in some other case. And JSON schema doesn't allow this at any point. Maybe we could extend it, but that would even be too complex. So yeah.
I mean, like in the bindings, we can, like, bindings are more flexible than the spec, especially that they're not yet under V1. So headers can also have different schemas or different definitions. Definitely, it's just a matter of like if it makes sense to.
I mean, yes, everything is possible, but the complexity behind adding that on top of something without having it as a standard behavior would, I think, be too complex for tooling. But yeah.
Also, like having extension for bindings could also solve it. Like you can see X header value or something. It could be anything. And then you can use it.
Interesting.
So that was what I had to say. Now you can start with the few things. I'll stop share. I will look into more for how we can use parameters. If you could, no, we could not use parameters, but if you could use other ways to do it with Spec, and I'll update the PR, comment in the PR.
Yeah, explore this idea of constants.
Yeah.
And or if really it cannot be solved on a server level with information about authorization, because like it looks like it's mainly just because of authorization, right? It's not for any other. Yeah. And we have this binding on the server level as well. So maybe WebSocket binding on the server level should somehow refer to the authorization. I don't know. But in case of environment variables, I think it's separate discussion, because as far as I remember from your pull request on WebSocket, that's why you pulled it into 3.0 meeting. It was because like Fran was also referring to things like, for example, in case of Kafka, when you have schemas, like, damn it, I have so many flies here. Sorry. So he was also talking about environment variables in the context of oh Jesus, the schema registries, that basically whenever you can reference schema from a schema registry in your async API file, but the schema registries are usually protected. You need to authenticate to actually fetch the schema. And he was also referring like that it's the scope of concept of variables, environment variables, extends also to, for example, this part of the spec. Like how can you in the spec specify the authorization method for schema registry? But again, I know that there was this pull request that recently bumped Kafka binding with information where you can specify now specific details about the schema registry. So again, might be that this variable concept, again, it makes sense to solve it through different ways than just introducing some environment variable concept, like general concept.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll look into more and I'll update the PR, and then like you can have another meeting with them on it if you need it.
Okay.
And stop sharing.
Okay, second question or discussion. It's kind of related to that, but not really then. Is it really not possible to define query parameters and headers within async API without bindings? We can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, I thought I muted and I muted instead of unmute. Query parameters were, you mean on the channel name?
Yeah, all I'm questioning is whether the WebSocket bindings, for example, where we have very specifically defined for query and headers, it was my understanding before actually reading those bindings that it was possible to do it natively within the spec itself. So my question is that really not possible to do?
Like, so in the spec, for example, let's talk about this query parameters. So in case of Kafka and anything else, like broker centric, you don't have query parameters, right? Query parameters are only in WebSocket. So that's why basically it's not allowed to have a name with query parameters. The channel name can be only you can have separators like slash or dots, but you cannot have question mark and query parameters. And so and it's, at least from the past, I remember that the only use case for query parameters is for WebSocket. That's why you have this query binding, like WebSocket binding on a channel level where you can specify query. And I remember it just because I was writing this Gemini example basing on this Gemini WebSocket API, where their first version of the API was basically they did not follow yet any sub protocol. So you basically, if you wanted to have specific information only from a specific currency, you had to connect to the channel bypassing, not bypassing, but by passing a specific query parameters with some specific values. And to describe it with async API document, the only option is really to do it in the binding, because you're not allowed to have query parameters in the channel name. Yeah.
And what about headers?
And headers in it's also like, I mean, you don't have, like in async API, you have headers only on the message level, right?
Yes.
But there, in case of WebSocket, it's useless because you don't have headers when you start exchanging messages. You have it when you pass only the authorization header when you connect.
So I in Glee, I've been like working with WebSockets for this PR, and like I mean, right now, is it? Yeah, right now we can pass in headers and query because like if you're using a HTTP server as a WebSocket server, right? Like you can create WebSockets with HTTP servers, so then it can support your headers and queries. Because also this new WebSocket library specifies you help. It lets you pass in headers as a different object, as a separate object. So if I share my screen, it's a bit of code. So something like this. So you can use your query values and build the URL to connect to, like this. And when you create a new WebSocket instance, like WebSocket client, you can pass in the headers as an object. So it takes the headers. Now I don't know what goes in under the hood.
Yeah, but it's only on the to establish the connection. That's the only moment where you send the header.
So what happens? So this is the client side, right? Look, in server, I can then query on the header. I can take out the headers and query from the URL itself, and then I mean, then check like is this the headers we wanted or not.
Yeah, but again, like it's it's only on a connection level when you establish the connection between the client and the server. But when you, for example, start receiving messages, they don't.
No. That when you start receiving messages, there's no concept of headers.
Yeah, exactly.
Only when connecting.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the thing here, that you need header only to establish this connection. Because like you establish, like with WebSocket, you establish the connection through HTTP. So you have headers, you can send header with authorization, and that's done. Like it's even with GraphQL subscriptions, you also have to first do the HTTP authentication. But then there's no headers. So you basically like going back to Jonas' question, like so you then you can have multiple messages, right? So so on the message level headers, you shouldn't put this information about authorization in the message header. That's why there's this headers property in the WebSocket binding on a channel level. So you explicitly say that on this channel, you have this query parameters and this headers that you need to have to establish the
So
connection.
conceptually, it just makes more sense to have that definition on the channels for WebSockets.
Yes, because you need this only when you connect.
Right.
On a,
Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
Although I think there's one issue where we're not yet 100% sure, and I think I was suggesting that might be that headers, because they are used for connection, and server is where we describe the connection. That I think that we have still ongoing discussion in one of the issues in the bindings that might be that headers should be actually, like WebSocket binding headers should be maybe moved to server WebSocket binding. Yeah, just remember it's not yet 1.0.
All right. Okay. It's gonna be a bit complex in the end if we have multiple places for you to define headers, because in theory, it's just the concept level. It makes sense to have it in the channels. But in theory, you could just define it using the message headers, even for the WebSocket protocol, even though conceptually it doesn't really make sense because it's not used like for the specific message, but for when you connect to the specific WebSocket server, right? So if you just have a channel that has one message definition, you could have the headers as part of that message. And it would, in theory, make sense. I would assume some would do this. But then again, if you wanted to be more conceptually correct, you would, and if you're using WebSockets, you would do it via the bindings. Is that how to understand it? Basically.
But there could, it's not just conceptually, it's also like efficiently, not sure if that's the right word, but basically like, but you can have a channel where you have multiple messages. It's not just one, right? We have this all of.
Yes.
Yeah,
for sure.
One of, yeah. And so you would, so if you'd like to use current message headers, then you would have to basically duplicate the header all over the place. I mean, of course, you have references, traits, whatever, but it's, I think, more hacky. And it might be confusing only from, remember that we always look at the spec from our perspective, like maintainer's perspective. So you see it as the whole. But the WebSocket user doesn't care about the whole. They care about WebSocket. So they will look on the WebSocket binding and assumably they will figure out that, oh yeah, that makes sense.
That's what I'm doing right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how Suvik worked. Like for him, it was obvious it has to be in the binding.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so I can actually tell you my story. So when I was writing this Gemini example file, and I was like, okay, so looking at their docs, they have query parameters. I went to the spec and I can't do query parameters. And then I was like, hey, let's see the binding. And then from the binding, I figured out I can use binding for it. So that was my user flow.
This brought up so many questions. It's not great for the agenda, but that's just how it is. So why do we have I'm not sure we should even discuss it here, but why do we have location for a parameter then, if it's why do we have the possibility to define where the parameter is located if it's only part of the channel name?
If you ask me, when I saw you showing this, that it's possible, I had mindfuck. I was like, seriously, we can do it? So it's one of the oldest features, I think, when I was still a kid. And I don't remember when it was added.
Okay, I'm gonna raise an issue for it.
Yeah, it would be nice to clarify, especially that this example there, it's in this spec description, it's pretty confusing.
Yeah, but because if the description didn't have that phrase where it says that it must be part of the parameters or the channel name or topic, technically that would solve your WebSocket problem. Or not problem, but that would mean that the WebSocket and HTTP bindings wouldn't need to specify headers for the channel bindings, right?
Could be, but
Potentially.
could be.
Okay, I'm gonna raise it as an issue. All right, anything else for this? I think there was one more thing, but now I can't remember it because now we've been all over.
Yeah, but it's
Right.
weird. That is like this example is weird. Like you have parameter in a channel name, but there in the location you specify the ID is actually in the payload.
Yes.
Yeah, weird. It was a good meeting, very educational.
For sure.
We
All
lost
right, we
Michael
have-
and Jesse, so I'm not sure if for others it was educational. I hope for you, Jose, it was.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
I'm Johnny for the first time. I work for MuleSoft. I'm really
Okay.
interested in all this thing stuff. So I'm here just to learn from you guys.
Awesome. I haven't seen MuleSoft folks for some time here, so it's good. Welcome.
Thank
There's
you.
one project that folks from MuleSoft maintain it at Async API. So if you want to learn more, just ask later.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, 2 minutes to go. I want to quickly introduce this very, very large discussion already. So a few weeks back, I introduced, or I started working on a standard that would allow us to reference non-JSON schema types for the message payload. So you could define a message payload using protobuf or XSD or any other schema format, basically, that is non-JSON. And that sparked a lot of discussion that went back and forth between a lot of different topics and a lot of different scenarios where it was unclear how the standards currently define that behavior that the tooling must follow or what is to expected of them. So I started this discussion to highlight some of the inconsistencies that we currently know of, and maybe even figure out if there's something that we missed. So I split it up into something like unknown and known behavior cases. So I started laying out exactly what is the behavior when we see this specific async API document, for example. For example, this could be if I want to define message payloads using another JSON schema version than draft 7, which is, or our async API schema object. Then the question arises of whether something like this would be possible to do, or whether a reference tooling would be able to correctly understand this. For example, that it would automatically load all schemas that is defined within the async API document and automatically match the ID of the schema with whatever reference there is somewhere else. So here you wouldn't need to have this relative reference to component schemas user signed up. That wouldn't be necessary because it was expected from tooling to automatically match those two. At least that's the idea, because this is something that has been enabled in the newer JSON schema draft versions. So this was just one of the use cases where I'm not sure what the standards define as the expected behavior here. So I have 10 use cases that I tried to figure out, especially also in terms of non-JSON references. For example, how should it be interpreted? How could it be loaded into tooling? etc., etc. So yeah, jump into it. We're out of time. I'll probably introduce it next time as well. Let's see. But yeah,
Looks like an easy topic.
no, not at all.
9 days and just 46 replies.
Yes.
How encouraging.
Yeah, this is one of the rabbit holes that are it. Unless you really like it, it's gonna be tough to follow. So yeah,
I think you
am
like rabbit holes, definitely.
Yes, I do. I do.
It's not your first one.
But yeah, hopefully it will make it a better ecosystem in the end, across standards, basically.
Yeah.
But let's see.
Makes sense.
I'm definitely gonna do some summaries along the process, so you don't have to follow every single discussion that we have. And I'm gonna share it here as well. Yeah, that's it from me. Any questions before we are off? No? All right. Thank you, folks, for a productive meeting. Mind-blown meeting.
True story, bro. Thanks.
Thank you.